Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, has demanded immediate guarantees about the residency rights of people from other EU countries currently living in Scotland. The First Minister has written to David Cameron, the Prime Minister, and the 5 Conservative leadership candidates ahead of a summit with European diplomats in Edinburgh on Tuesday. Well, I'm joined now by her predecessor, Alex Salmond, who's now, of course, the SNP's Foreign Affairs spokesman. He's in Aberdeenshire. And a very good morning to you, Mr Salmond. Now, this demand for guarantees for EU nationals residing in Scotland, even if those guarantees were given by the Prime Minister and indeed all the 5 leadership hopefuls, presumably they're not worth much because negotiations need to take place with the European Union about all those kind of things in the exit procedure.
No, they would be worth something. Of course they would, Dermot, because whether your rights of residency are guaranteed under European law or under a decision of the UK government, they would still be guaranteed. And therefore Nicola Sturgeon, who incidentally has been playing an absolute blinder throughout this process, probably the only political leader of which that could be said, is absolutely right to demand that guarantee now instead of people facing the uncertainty. And also, just as I know people both in Scotland and England, the feeling of lack of welcome. And therefore, to have a political leader like Nicola Sturgeon to lay it on the line and say these people should be guaranteed, they're hard-working people contributing massively to this country, their rights should be guaranteed now is exactly the right move to make.
But there are those saying, aha, this is a clever ploy, and, the guarantees might not be coming from Westminster, and the best way of making sure the guarantees are copper-bottomed is that Ms Sturgeon could answer her own question. As leader of an independent Scotland, then she can unequivocally say that to EU nationals.
Can I tell you something, Dermot? This whole crisis about the UK's relationship with the European Union, Scotland's relationship with Europe, this has gone way beyond clever ploys. There's been a seismic movement of opinion in Scotland which says that one way or another Scotland's position in Europe must be consolidated and guaranteed. And Nicola Sturgeon is carrying not just the SNP opinion behind her, but a broad spread of political opinion in Scotland. This is way beyond political ploys. This is about national leadership, which Nicola Sturgeon is providing.
Indeed. But tell me in your gut, Mr Salmond, do you feel another independence referendum coming, given the mess there seems to be in Westminster at the moment, the leadership vacuum?
Yes, in my guts I do, but Nicola Sturgeon is perfectly right to make her negotiating priority to examine every possible way to consolidate Scotland's position as a European nation, and then as that unfolds, then decisions will have to be made. But she's doing exactly the right thing, and I give her my unconditional support on that.
And how much detail have you examined as Foreign Affairs spokesman, of course, some kind of deal that while all the negotiations are going on, while the Brexit process is taking place, that Scotland, even if it has not left the United Kingdom, remains within the European Union? People talking about some kind of parallels with Denmark and its membership, for instance.
Yeah, that's the reverse Greenland, let's call it that, Dermot. It's under Article 48, and the argument is that the Kingdom of Denmark includes both the Faroe Islands and Greenland, but Denmark continues in the European Union, but the Greenland and indeed the Faroe Islands are out with EU competence. That's the example that people cite. But that should be explored, it should be examined to see if people are prepared to come to some sort of agreement on that. But, that's only one of a number of options. I doubt, actually, if it's the most promising option myself. But nonetheless, Nicola Sturgeon is quite right to explore all options. And that is exactly what should be done just now. She's the only leader who's participating in negotiations. She's the only one with a plan. Which is quite remarkable, given that among the people who should have a plan are those who wanted Brexit in the first place.
What is the most promising option, in your view, Mr Salmond?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon is taking things in proper order, and that is to establish how Scotland's position within the European context can be protected. That's what people in Scotland voted for, by 62% to 38%, every single area of Scotland. She also has a mandate from May's elections where it was made quite clear that under these circumstances, if indeed Scotland were to be threatened with being dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people, then the Scottish Parliament would be entitled to hold another independence referendum. She has a perfect mandate for these situations which are now arising, but she's absolutely right to take forward that express will of the Scottish people to remain part of the European framework.
Now, I want to ask you whether you agree with some of what Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, was saying to me on this programme an hour ago. I know there's an awful lot you disagree with him about, but let's start perhaps with this. When it comes to the negotiations with the European Union, that the UK should keep its options open and no hurry, presumably, then to trigger Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty.
Well, I'm not certain that the European cause, which is under such difficulty at the present moment, is going to be greatly aided by Tony Blair's assistance. Look, you can't undo what has been done. There has been a referendum in the UK, and English politicians will follow the mandate they've been given from the people, just as Nicola Sturgeon is following the mandate she's been given from the Scottish people. You could conjecture that the only way you could get into a different situation if there was another general election, and in that general election a party or parties were elected with a different mandate from the people, then you'd be in different circumstances. But I'm not certain that Tony Blair's hints and suggestions you might undo a referendum that's just taken place is going to be an enormous asset to the European cause at the present moment.
Just on that, Mr. Salmond, so if we got a majority of parties within a parliament after a general election that were unequivocally wanting to remain members of the European Union, the SNP presumably amongst them, you're saying you might band together to overturn the referendum result?
Well, can I just point out, in that timescale that you're putting forward, unless there was a snap general election, which seems to be getting less likely given the mood music within the Conservative Party. Indeed, that's the one thing they're united on, not to have a general election. Then I think there'll be other constitutional developments which will overtake these events in Scotland.
Let me ask you about potential criminal developments. And, we mentioned Tony Blair there, the Chilcot inquiry finally reporting on Wednesday after 6 years and some. You've said in the past that you believe there may be grounds to investigate Mr. Blair's role, in particular the deal he did or didn't do with George W. Bush to join in the invasion of Iraq. Yeah,
I mean, the two things about Blair's interview, I mean, firstly, remarkably coy, he's not going to talk to you until Wednesday. I mean, that didn't stop him talking to CNN last October when he apologised for other people's action, the famous non-apology apology, or for that matter, a few weeks ago to your rival programme on a Sunday morning where he was already preparing his defences. Remember, Tony Blair has seen the Chilcot report, the passages relating to him, and has seen it for months. He's had months to prepare with his legal advisers, his PR advisers. The families of the 179 British dead are going to get 3 hours of notice this coming Wednesday. And that disparity of preparation and information is one of the many disgraces in the political system that we have. The other thing about Tony Blair's interview was he seemed puzzled as to why Jeremy Corbyn thinks he's a war criminal, why people don't like him. The reason is 179 British war dead, 150,000 immediate dead from the Iraq conflict, the Middle East in flames, the world faced with an existential crisis on terrorism. These are just some of the reasons, perhaps, that you should understand why people don't hold him in the highest regard.
And Mr. Salmond, have you had conversations with Jeremy Corbyn about that very issue, about practically trying to get Tony Blair to answer some of those charges you're making?
No, I haven't, but not in recent times, not since he's become leader of the Labour Party, for example, or conversations in the past. But I've had very recent conversations with a number of Labour members of Parliament, and we are waiting to see Chilcot producing the evidence, which we believe is there, which will allow action to be taken. Now, that action is going to be difficult, because the most obvious crime of which Tony Blair could be charged is a war of aggression, and the International Criminal Court doesn't as yet have jurisdiction over that. Ironically, that won't happen until next January. And the domestic courts, at least in England, have chosen not to pursue crimes which are international. That's been the general rule of the domestic courts in England. Incidentally, that's not been tested in Scotland, Dermot. And then the third option, of which many MPs are interested in, subject to the findings of the Chilcot report, and that's which parliamentary methods could be used to hold someone, if the evidence is there, to proper account. But one way or another, there are many MPs, and this is not a party political thing, this is across the political parties, who are absolutely determined that account has to be held to, that you cannot have a situation where this country blunders into an illegal war with the appalling consequences, and at the end of the day, there isn't a reckoning. There has to be a judicial or political reckoning for that.
OK, Mr Salmond, thank you very much indeed. Alex Salmond there, the SNP's Foreign Affairs spokesman.